Welcome to Love Light, the only podcast dedicated to bright, fine art photography. Hosted by Sarah Jane Ethan, Love Light is here to celebrate all things bright, pretty and pastel. At Love Light, white is the new black and beauty is in the detail. This is your place to relax, a place to belong, a place to be inspired and connect with like-minded colleagues who share your passion for light and beauty. So come and introduce yourself in the Love Light Facebook group and subscribe to the Love Light YouTube, podcast and Instagram for your weekly dose of inspiration and connect with bright, fine art photographers from around the world.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Love Light podcast. Today we've got Sophie Kaye. Sophie Kaye is an award-winning and internationally published film photographer, so we're really excited to have her here. She lives in New York City with her French bulldog, Olive, and she's been featured in Vogue, Martha Stewart Weddings, Style Me Pretty, Wedding Sparrow, Brides, The Knot, and has a wedding about to be featured on Over the Moon as well this year. She started photography when she was 16, almost 13 years ago, and now photographs full-time weddings and editorials, including many commercial clients and designers. And she's also photographed the New York Fashion Week and Bridal Fashion Week. So fashion and editorial work has heavily influenced her wedding work. So I just think you're just going to be the most fascinating person to talk to, Sophie. I'm so thrilled that you've come here to share your story and your experience with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Oh, you're welcome. And we just saw my little cat, Jeremy, for those of you who are listening to the audio only. Jeremy, my little crazy half dog cat, just made an appearance, and your little dog, Olive, might make an appearance at some point in this episode.
We're hoping not.
So it's fur babies all round for this episode. But Sophie, so you've got a fascinating career because you not only do weddings, but you also do editorials and you have commercial clients and fascinating things like London Fashion Week that you photographed as well. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in photography that then ended up leading to all of these fascinating projects.
I got really into it when I was about 16. My mom had one of those little point and shoot cameras that everyone kind of gets started with.
Amazing.
I was taking a lot of pictures of flowers and of my friends because I was determined to get into it. I was really into it in high school. I was involved in the newspaper, and I was the teacher's assistant for all of the photo classes. So I basically spent my high school career in the photo lab. I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City for photography for college. And while I was there, a big part of that school is that they all of the teachers are working professionals in the field. So a lot of my teachers were working photographers.
Wow.
And one of my teachers was the art director, or the photo director, sorry, of Harper's Bazaar at the time.
Right.
So I was just obsessed with her class because I felt like she was kind of the epitome of like what I was interested in. I thought at that time I was determined to really become a fashion photographer, and I was like, I want to be in Vogue, and that's my dream. So I started shooting Fashion Week because this is just a great city for it.
Yeah.
And then eventually I got into Bridal Fashion Week because it kind of naturally progressed over to that. And that was like my true love. All of a sudden I realized that you could photograph all of those like beautiful gowns and everything that I was excited to shoot at Fashion Week. So it was kind of like a natural progression over to the bridal side. And then sort of into the wedding world where I'm still very happily currently.
That's amazing. How fascinating and so diverse. You kind of got the introduction into the fashion world through your tutors at the time. So that's what introduced you to it. And so it's obviously a love that's lingered for you. You still love photographing fashion, and that very much influences the way that you photograph weddings. You said that. So tell me about what it is about fashion and editorial that you love and how that translates into wedding work.
So I actually don't know. I just started sort of falling in love with the styling and art direction behind fashion editorials. I was always obsessed with other fashion photographers. I followed a lot of Paolo Roversi's work and some of the bigger kind of like big fashion photographers who were shooting for ones like Vogue or Harper's and things like that. I worked at Teen Vogue for a little while, and I think that was a big part of it too. At that time when I was in college, I was sort of branching out into every possible direction. And I started doing little styled shoots on my own, things that would allow me to play around with like the fashion and utilizing models and things. I think I was just so heavily kind of involved in that world when everyone else was starting to figure out the direction they were eventually going to go in.
Yes.
And I was like fascinated by all of the creativity that is behind the scenes of a fashion shoot.
Yeah.
It ended up working really well because so many of my clients now are really heavily involved in the fashion world. I have a lot of clients who work at different magazines or who just love fashion and love following fashion. And the fact that I still do bridal fashion week and New York fashion week and things like that is good because they also have an interest in that, so they like following along too.
That's amazing, and you must get to see the most. Like I think, like you said, the creativity backstage it just oozes through the designers. I think one of the shoots I saw of yours, she had a dress and it was just covered in flowers, like 3D flowers all over, like, and you had her against a mirror or something, and it just looked just absolutely stunning. So you just find that working with those creative people just makes you feel more creative in your work. Is that what you love about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, the whole idea of collaboration is really, really heavily encouraged, I think, in the fashion and editorial world.
Right.
The idea of getting to work with different stylists and art directors and designers, it's like adding in a different level of the creative process when all of a sudden not only are you the only one directing and creating an idea, but all of a sudden you maybe have a stylist who's come in to say like, why don't we try this angle, or why don't we try this idea or this dress against this background. I just really love that aspect of it. I think it makes it so much more interesting when you have different minds coming together to create like an end result. I love that part of it.
That's amazing. So how many people are you typically working with when you're doing an editorial shoot then? How many people are there, do you know, that you're working with, creators and designers and stylists? And
so the one with the floral dress, it was a shoot that we did with Marchesa because we had done it as a promotion for my Paris workshop, which was a few years ago. I went into it with this idea that I really wanted to create a almost promotional video. So like when you watch a video online where it's maybe for a perfume ad or something that was more of an art film, I loved the idea of presenting this Paris workshop with sort of an art film related to it so that people could kind of get into it from a visual aspect, not only me telling them what they could expect. So the stylist I was working with, her name is Elizabeth. She's from East Made Co. She and I were working together on the workshop. So she came up to New York. We had a videographer who flew in from California. We had a florist and hair and makeup and the gowns. So usually it ends up being a team of about 6 or 7 people. And it's so interesting to see how kind of different people think of things in terms of like, the florist thinking about how the flowers should be shot, but maybe also how we can utilize the flowers to create a different scene or a different setup or something like that, rather than just me as a photographer approaching the shoot.
That's amazing. And so having done this kind of work, because some people who listen to this podcast episode, they're still kind of finding their niche. They're finding, you know, what market they want to go into. And so for those that are really interested in the idea of doing fashion and editorial, what do you think, you know, the people that you're collaborating with, the stylists, what are they looking for in a photographer? Like, what is it that makes you easy to work with and makes them keep coming back, you know, to work with you?
I think the idea that you're coming into this as part of a team, so you need to be open to representing every single part of the team in the end result. It's really, really important, I think, that you finish a shoot where every part of the editorial or vendor team feels like their work was shown. I did a shoot not too long ago in Brooklyn with a group of about, I think, maybe 5 or 6 people, and the florist had created this incredible setup of like a garden scene for the ceremony space. And as beautiful as it was, I mean, how many photos of the ceremony do you end up using as a photographer, especially when you're doing a styled shoot? We used maybe 3 or 4 of those images where she had spent an hour creating this garden
Wow.
scene.
Yeah.
And so instead of just dismantling the garden scene and moving on to our next setup, I thought it would be cool instead if we created like a formal portrait of the bride and groom. So we moved all of the floral setups and styled them around a chair so that we could have the bride and groom sit
Nice.
together. And I think, I mean, I don't want to be like, oh yeah, that was like a great idea on my part, but I do
It
think
sounds like it.
the idea that you're not just looking out for your end result, but
Mm-hmm.
the idea that you're looking out for the florists and making sure they feel like they got their um, time's worth out of this production, and
Yeah.
making sure that the hair and makeup artist feels like they got to show off their talent and to show off their the effort that they put into this shoot too. I think
Yeah.
it comes across as just a more supportive situation when you're all working together to show off each other's talents, not just your
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. I suppose nobody wants to work with a diva who's just all about me and what I want, what I'm going to do, but actually to
own.
acknowledge
Exactly.
that you're part of a team and to find out, what are you needing from this shoot? What do you need from the photos, and just kind of to work with them like that. That's really good advice. So do you kind of work with the stylists and clients that you worked with as a result of starting off, from your college days, when your tutors were introducing you to this world, or have you worked to create more contacts within that industry to widen the amount of people that you work with?
I think I've been pretty directive in terms of my end goal. I think
Yes.
I'm always been really interested in the whole idea of like the editorial and the
Yeah.
fashion shoot and the commercial shoot, and it's really interesting to meet other stylists and art directors who are also
Mm.
interested in that. Um, I've had a lot of people, both other vendors and clients, approach me because they say that my work is very very editorial. I have a lot
Mm.
of brides who say like, "Oh, I want my wedding photos to look like they're in a magazine."
Yeah.
Um, and I think sort of that like look is distinctive. I know it's sort
Yes.
of becoming a bigger thing now where people are involving a fashion element to their work,
Mhm.
and I think that's really interesting. I think plus the idea of just like creating a connection with photographers with other vendors who maybe have similar interests.
Yeah.
Um, like an art direction, or it's always really interesting when you start to discuss a potential shoot with a team and you create
Mm.
like a Pinterest board and you start all gathering different inspiration, and to see kind of things like that fall together is really interesting to me.
That's so
Um,
good.
yeah, I think that's sort of part of it. I think it's been like a conscious effort to try and head towards people that I find really inspiring, who are creating work
Yes.
that excite me the way that they're excited about it.
That's so good. And so the Pinterest board, do you create that together as your suppliers, or is that something that you create and go to them with an idea and say this, do you fancy a shoot like this, or how does that work?
I think it's a combo of both.
Yeah.
I probably have like 10 or 12 Pinterest boards going at any time with different
Hilarious.
ideas.
I love it.
I just think it's great to look at different inspiration. I'm
Mm.
really obsessed with history and with art history, and
Yeah.
I love I know of course everyone loves like the European aesthetic and the old world. I think
Yeah.
that's a huge part of inspiration. But um a lot of times if a stylist is interested in working with me, we'll kind of discuss maybe the things we're interested in at that
Mm.
time. Maybe they saw something, a recent fashion show, or a museum exhibit or something that we can kind of draw inspiration from, and we'll generally start to create a Pinterest board together. um,
Oh.
I love having different viewpoints come in on a shoot together. I think it makes the editorial so much more layered
Yeah.
and interesting when you have people coming from different um, aspects, but also
Mm.
different things of their idea of the end result is different from yours.
Mm.
So that
Yeah.
eventually you come out with images that you didn't necessarily expect to get, but maybe someone
Yeah.
else thought of. Definitely.
That's quite exciting, I think, you know, when it's something that you hadn't thought of, you're like, oh, I like this, actually. That is a nice process to go through. So you said that, like, I love the idea that you're looking at displays in museums and art galleries and things, and then actually bringing that into your shoot. And you mentioned that Europe is a big source of inspiration for you. So talk about, because I want to get into your head, because your work is so fascinating, and you can't teach how to think, you know, how a person thinks. So tell me what you see when you're looking at Europe, when you're looking at museums and art galleries, and the things that inspire you. Like, what is it that really makes you excited, you know, and then forms the way that you do your shoots and create your images?
I love art so much, and I love history, and I love the idea that there are locations and places that people have been for thousands of years. Every time I go to London, I was saying London is like my favorite city in the world. It feels like an old New York to me. And as much as I love New York and I love the history here, it's so different when the history here is 200 years old and the history in London is thousands of years old. I could probably spend my entire life in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. I love it so much. I love looking at sculpture and the way that people created sculptures with the most beautiful poses. The idea that you can go into a museum and take a pose from a sculpture and then try and replicate it in a photograph or something to really bring sort of a more like conceptual side to it, I think is an interesting idea. I use film a lot, so I'm primarily a film photographer, and the idea that a lot of the texture of film sort of imitates the texture of painting, I like that a lot too. It's very watercolor like, and
So
I
true.
think it tends to have sort of a beautiful like Monet sort of texture to it. And last year I went to Monet's gardens and during spring, and that was just like incredibly inspiring to walk around those gardens and see the way that the color and texture and to photograph those on film too, it was amazing. I think it's just the idea of not only looking at photography for inspiration is refreshing, and I think it's necessary because a lot of people sort of get caught up in the idea of just pulling inspiration from other photographers. And I think it's so much more important to look at other forms of art or typography or architecture. Just the idea that like beautiful things are attractive to us, and they can sort of give us and lend us inspiration in our own work.
I love that. That is so good. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I think if you're just taking inspiration from other photographers, we run the risk that we just start doing the same type of pictures, you know, over and over. And so getting that external source, I suppose, just creates a different vision in your mind that means that you could then create something that surprises even yourself. You go, oh yeah, didn't even think I was going to do that.
And it's so funny because so when I was in college, I went to this school that was very much sort of like a fine art, which I feel like the term fine art in our industry means something very different from the term in fine art in traditional art, where everywhere in college was very much like your end goal should be to be presenting to a gallery and have your work shown in an art gallery. Whereas I was completely not interested in that whatsoever. So that was difficult. But a lot of times I think the idea of creating beautiful art just for beauty's sake without a deeper level of meaning was kind of scorned, I think, among a lot of people who were more interested in developing very conceptual pieces. And the idea that not necessarily everything you were creating had a deeper conceptual meaning was not necessarily promoted, I think, there, which was really interesting because I was so focused on creating these incredible pieces that were just focused on beauty and fashion and architecture and art and things like that. And I still think I run into it a little. I still think sometimes people feel like beautiful things just for beauty's sake are not necessarily taken as seriously as things that have a deeper meaning. But I think it's important sometimes to just let ourselves love beautiful things. I think it makes you so happy to have beautiful flowers and to look at different beautiful textures. And I love gowns that have incredible detail and embroidery, like the flowered one you were talking about is one of my favorites. it's like eye candy.
Yes.
It's like joyful. And so
Hey.
I think a lot of that is really still important to me. I think I need those sort of things to
Mm.
create art that I love. And you can find that a lot when you're walking around older cities. There's a lot of over the ages through different art periods like Art Nouveau or the
Mm.
Gilded Age, they embraced that idea that you could
Yeah.
create beautiful things that didn't necessarily have a deeper meaning but were just as
Yeah.
important. So I think that's a big part of it too. I love those sort of things. They make me so happy.
Oh, I totally that shoot that you did with the lady with the flowery dress, I mean, it just makes me happy. There's one
Yeah.
picture, I think, where she's reaching towards the mirror and it's just a close up of her finger touching the finger in the mirror, and it just is mesmerizing. I could just look at that picture and it just, like you said, it makes me happy. And I think this is why I built the Love Light community to bring together the work that I love, basically. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of get the chance to pick and choose the pictures that I really love. And I love bright colors and I love pastel colors and bright light, and it just makes me happy. And I suppose what you're saying, because when you're trying to create a deeper meaning, I suppose you're thinking about what someone else is going to think of this work. Whereas if you're just photographing something because it's beautiful and you love it, you're doing it for you. You're doing it because you love it. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what anybody else thinks, or whether people think that it's got a deep meaning and therefore more significant, whatever. You're just doing it for you. Is that a big part of what's driven your photography? Is to almost like please yourself, like to express your creativity and what you find beautiful, rather than worrying what other people will be thinking or judging or thinking about your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it as wedding photographers is we create the majority of the work for other people.
Very
Um,
true.
so as much as I love wedding photography, I really do. I'm absolutely in love with all of the jobs I do for the different couples. But ultimately you're creating those images to please someone else. And
Yes.
and I think as artists who need to sit down and create the majority of our work, especially if you're full time and it's what you do every weekend,
Hmm.
ignoring the fact that we're in a pandemic, but every weekend, um, it's tough to then sit down and create the majority of the art you do for someone else. And I
Yes.
think it's important still to do some things that just make you feel like you're so in love with the medium
Yeah.
and that you're creating art that you love to look at.
Hmm.
Um, and what's amazing about that is I think managed to draw in couples, brides especially, who also enjoy those things too. So by
Yeah.
creating a body of work that just is full of the things I love, and the images that I love hearing from brides who are like, I'm obsessed with the styled shoot you did. It's so
Wow.
beautiful. I want my wedding photos to look as beautiful and feel luminous and
Hmm.
romantic and painterly, because I feel like then you're able to sort of combine your two loves, and I think that's important too. Um, but especially when you're creating work for other people, I think it's important to be able to kind of sneak in your own things. I mean, I it happens a lot with styled shoots. I do a lot of styled shoots just because I like them so much, and
Yeah.
I run into a lot of people who don't necessarily love styled shoots as much. But there's so much work sometimes, and there's a lot of money that
Mm.
goes into them. But the getting back your film from a beautiful styled shoot that you feel proud of is like the most wonderful feeling.
That's amazing. So now you mentioned that you have a lot of wedding clients looking at your editorial work saying, I love that. I want my wedding
Mhm.
pictures to look like that. Now this is something that I've heard talked about a lot on forums, is the challenge of wedding clients seeing editorial work and then wanting their wedding to look like that, but you're not in control of all the elements
Right.
to the same degree that you would be at an editorial shoot. And so how do you manage that tension between clients wanting their images to look like an editorial shoot when you're not in that realm of control like you are at an editorial shoot?
Yeah, that's such a good point because especially now when we're so inundated with Pinterest images and Instagram, and I know a lot of my clients just sit there and scroll through Instagram and look at different work from other photographers. I think it's really interesting though is that they sort of pick up on small pieces
Mm.
throughout. I actually just had a bride, which this is so relevant to this question. So I just had a bride who bought a gown from a designer, and it was sort of like a brocade thick material, and it was beautiful, and she sent me a picture of it. And then literally a month later, she texted me and she's like, "You're not going to believe this, but I kept seeing brides on your Instagram wear these textured floral gowns, and I decided that's what I want for my wedding." So she exchanged her dress made of the heavier material and instead went with a dress that was sort of a little transparent and allows light to come through and has texture and florals and like that 3D element. I think it's so interesting that you're putting out there things that they can pick up on, that they sort of like catch their eye. I tell all my clients the same things. I tell them you should have a lot of light in your getting ready spaces. You should have a lot of light in your ceremony. Put a million candles in your reception so that it feels like luminous and there's a lot of ambiance and sort of things like that, which I think you can kind of help sort of nudge them in the correct way to get that look. A lot of clients too are really invested in their flat lays, a lot of my clients. So I think that's a big part of it too, is when they'll first approach me and say like, what should I bring for my flat lays? What are important details that I can bring? I really want flat lays that have lots of flowers, and then you can reach out to their florist to say, we need all these flowers for their flat lays. It's almost like you can give them a project, and they're as excited as art directing their wedding as you would be sort of art directing an editorial. Which is so funny because I've run into so many photographers who are very anti art direction on a wedding day, and sort of like stepping in and having that element of styling, I guess. But luckily I found clients who are just in love with the idea of having that sort of directed editorial look to their wedding images. I think also you can present yourself as a knowledgeable source. I try to be really, really open to all of my clients. They can contact me whenever they want. I've had people say, what flowers should I have? What kind of ribbon should I bring for my bouquet because I want to have ribbon? What calligraphers do you like because I love the look of this calligraphy suite? Things like that, where I mean, a lot of them, it's their first time doing it, and you can kind of help them out by giving them a little nod in one direction or the other.
That's amazing. And so because you said it does help that you've got clients who kind of want you to be more hands-on. They want you to direct a little bit more so that they can get the pictures that they want at the end of the day that look more like your editorial work. So in reality, on a wedding day, how much control are you able to have? You mentioned about, mentioning good light and stuff, but I mean, in terms of the running of the day and how things can get, can get rushed, or just can get a little bit crazy or out of your control. So how much are you able to direct and get what you want and ultimately what the client wants? And how much do you have to go, okay, let's just go with the flow. It isn't what I planned, but it's going to be okay.
Yeah, definitely. So I require about an hour for just details. So when I arrive to their wedding, there are no photos taken of people. It is just dedicated to the details they've selected. I have a lot of brides who show up and say, these are my 2 pairs of shoes. This is my hanger I purchased. These are my vow books. I've had parents show up with buckets full of antique silver dishes that they want used in details, or pictures of older family members of older weddings, and like family heirlooms and things that are important to them. So it's always really funny to me when parents get involved in it too, because they're excited about it.
So cute.
So I just put an hour for detail photos, and then usually I'll ask for about 30 to 40 minutes of bride and groom portraits, as well as about 15 minutes for sunset portraits. A lot of my clients, thankfully, get married outside. I think that's a big part of it. I kind of try to lead them early on in encouraging outdoor ceremonies, or picking a venue that maybe has outdoor locations that we can utilize. Ultimately, if I show up to their wedding and it's in a dark church and I can't even shoot film because it's really dark, or it's raining outside, I'm going to do the best I can. A lot of times I'll pull a bride to a window to try and do some luminous, natural lit images, even if she's getting ready in a really dark hotel room. A lot of it is pulling away the clutter, things like that. just controlling the things you can control,
Yeah.
so that I hopefully can give them sort of a gallery that is representative of my style.
Mm.
Um, I also send them a client guide beforehand, which suggests things like what to wear to your engagement session,
Mhm.
or getting ready robes if that's really important to you, or
Mm.
different vendors that I recommend. I think just education from the beginning helps. I think
Yeah.
sort of giving them someone to come to when they have questions about how to get those photos that they ultimately will love.
Yeah.
But again, there's only so much you can do. There have been times when I've had to just step back and be like, "Okay, this is not I'm just gonna give them the best photos that I can in this situation." Thankfully, I've never had anyone be like, "This doesn't look anything like your portfolio," but, there have definitely been locations that have not quite worked with,
Mm.
my goal aesthetic or the look that I would love to give them, but
Mm.
I think people are realistic too and sort of understand that maybe their ceremony is in a dark space if they're getting married in a family church that isn't that doesn't have a ton of windows, but I can give them like beautiful lit portraits and family photos and maybe getting ready photos and things like that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think I've found the same. I think people tend to be realistic about the fact that it was a challenging conditions that I was photographing on. I did the best that I could. So,
Yeah,
like you said,
exactly.
I've never had anybody be unreasonable, complain. I do know of a colleague who had a client who complained that there was no sun flare in her pictures when it was a rainy day.
Oh
She was
yeah.
like, "Well, I can't put sun flare when there was no sun." Like, oh my gosh. So yeah, fortunately I've never had anybody like that. And if anybody has, if like you said, if anybody would comment saying, "Oh, why does it look different?" I would just be honest and say, like, it was challenging lighting conditions. We did the best we could, and I think most people would be understanding about that. But yeah, I like the fact that you're gonna push yourself and get as much control as you can so that your clients will be as happy as they can be,
Right.
but at the same time giving yourself the space if you need to just go, okay, I'm not going to be able to do my best work, but I'm going to do good work, I'm going to do the best I can do under these conditions, and not beat yourself up about it is really important, because I think a lot of photographers can get really stressed, like, oh no, like it's out of control, this isn't what I pictured, and to actually have that balance of, okay, I'm going to have control when I can have it, and I'm going to let go of control when I can't, must be actually quite freeing and mean that you can work in a relaxed way and still enjoy your job.
Yeah, I think it's also important too, especially as a film photographer. I've heard of so many film photographers who really beat themselves up because they get to a situation where film is not ideal,
Mm,
and they freak out because they're like, I am a film photographer and I want to be shooting film in this location, but you're in a dark New York church. A lot of locations in
yeah.
New York are inside. We
Mm,
don't have a ton of we have some outdoor locations, but they're far and few between. Many of
yeah.
them are indoors and darker. Um, and they kind of freak out thinking I should be shooting film in order to be um, the best photographer I can be for my client. I think ultimately you have to use the tool that is best for the situation. um,
Yes.
so while I describe myself as a film photographer and I shoot mostly film, there are definitely times when I have switched to digital. If digital is going to work better for the situation and get my client a better results, I'm going to switch to digital. um,
Yes.
I think maybe that's also why I love editorials sort of as like a freeing creative process, because
Mm,
I have more control over um the medium that I use, because we can kind of
mm,
be a little more picky about the lighting and the
yes.
backgrounds and things like that.
Yeah.
Um so they're like I only shoot editorials on film and I only
Mm,
shoot engagement sessions on film. I haven't shot an
yes.
engagement session on digital in a really, really long time, because you can be a little more picky about um the lighting you're shooting in,
Yes.
or the locations. Um, but yeah, ultimately I think you need to like give in and accept that maybe sometimes you have to shoot digital. It's not the end of the world. It's okay. Your photos will still look beautiful.
Absolutely. How much of a wedding day do you find that you end up shooting on digital, or is it just purely dependent on that wedding if there are challenging conditions? Otherwise, you're purely film?
It's dependent on the wedding, but on a wedding, if I arrive to a wedding and it's outdoors and we have beautiful light, and also it's very dependent on whether or not I feel like the client it matters to the client. Because if there are situations where the client has allowed us maybe a little extra time for portraits, or has considered the lighting in the portraits, where I feel like, if I know, if a client has come to me and said, like, the portraits are the most important part, I love film portraits, I love the look of it, then obviously, like, that is a huge priority for me. Otherwise, I tend to shoot film up until the first dance. So that's sort of like after the first dance is when I usually switch to digital. A lot of times I'll have a second shooter shooting digital. I like to send a few sneak peeks within 24 hours to all my clients. So that's sort of like my give and take, knowing that they're going to have to wait a little longer to get any film sneak peeks if I send those. So that helps, I think. But usually the first dance is when I'll sort of put away the film camera and switch to digital, usually if I have to bring out lighting. Yeah, but I do love when they have like candlelit receptions, or when it's a little earlier so that we get sunset light in their reception. I love that. That's always pretty.
So nice. Now, I have a question for you, because if you're doing editorial work and you're working with models who know how to move their wrists and their fingers and their shoulders, and you've got wedding clients going, make me look like that, but they've got no experience with how to move their body or how their body moves. How do you work with that? With, the reality being that a lot of people are quite stiff because they've never done anything like this before, but they want to look like they're at ease, like a model in a magazine who has years of experience in how to look at ease in front of a camera. So talk me through how you help clients to know how to move and look like your editorial models.
Yeah, I'm really, really big on, I think I learned it from shooting editorials, like action posing, or not necessarily stiff posing. I really dislike when a photographer is posing their clients and tells them like not to move, because I think then they start to feel a little awkward. I have a lot of people sink into a pose where I'll have them bring their shoulders in a little bit or curl into each other. I think that helps, making them look a little more natural. Having them do things like walking together or turn around and walk back towards me is always helpful too. Actually, it's funny. I think working with models helped me become better at posing, because this sounds crazy, but you can tell a model if a pose does not look good, because they won't be offended, and it won't bother them if you say, I put you into this pose, but I'm really not loving it, I really want to switch it. It's a job for them, so they don't look at it as, I did this wrong, I didn't look good. So then you become a better poser, because then you can get comfortable with directing a model from a pose that you feel is maybe not as successful into one that you feel is a little more successful. And you sort of learn how to talk to people without making them feel like it's their fault or they feel self-conscious. I think that's a big part of it, because not being able to tell a client that you dislike a pose that you've put them in, it wastes time, and then you end up with photos that you don't love or that you don't feel are successful. I think that helps, sort of being able to direct a model out of a pose that I didn't like into a pose that I do like. There's a lot of action in my posing. I'm not big on like the stiff. I'll have them walk up and down stairs instead of pretending to walk, or walk back and forth, or walk towards each other and go in for a kiss, things like that.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. So you mentioned about you've learned how to tell people that it's not working without making them feel self-conscious. Do you have little go-to one-liners that you use in that scenario where you're just like, oh, this is not working, that does not look good, that you say to move things on without them then getting self-conscious?
Yeah, I'll usually try and direct them really smoothly into a different pose from that pose. So if they're sitting back to back or something and I don't feel like it's working, I might say, okay, can I have you rotate your body 3/4 angle and lean your head into him? Have him put his arm around her and pull her in a little closer. Things like sort of like almost what would feel like a natural progression from one pose to from one pose to another. Sort of like, rather than you're using that original pose as your end result, you're turning into sort of like the middle and guiding them into another one that can be the end result. I hate when people feel awkward in their photos, because I feel like you can tell very easily. It's also interesting because obviously when I'm shooting film, I don't get the photos back until 2 weeks later. So at that point, you've kind of almost like stepped back from the situation. I feel like during a shoot, I'm sure you get kind of caught up in the moment and in the wedding and what's going on, and you almost don't remember what you were directing them into or posing them as. So I think it's nice to be able to look back at shoots from a separate headspace rather than going home and downloading your images directly and looking at them. You almost get to do like a self critique sort of, because you've taken a step back. You don't necessarily you're not reliving the photos the moment you get home, and that helps too, I think, to kind of be able to look at photos and say, okay, well, this looked better because they were more comfortable with each other. I also tell every single client that the first 20 minutes is going to be extremely awkward and they're going to hate photos. And then after those 20 minutes, they'll be pros.
Brilliant.
It's always my goal when a groom finishes a session and it's like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say to people, awkward laughter looks great on camera, so don't worry if you if you're feeling like, what are we doing?
I'm so glad I'm not a videographer. I don't know how they make awkward moments look natural, because I can do it with a camera, but video, it must be so much harder.
That is so true. Yeah, I've never really thought of that before. Yeah, that's so true. Because I quite often, I don't really mind if couples laugh nervously, because it looks like they're having a wonderful time on a picture. So it works for me.
Yeah, I think also adding a little bit of intimacy to poses can make things feel much more comfortable. Again, having people sink into poses is very nice. Having them like touch against each other. If they're looking at each other with their faces really close together, I'll have them look at each other's lips instead of their noses, because it keeps them from going cross-eyed.
Hilarious.
Little
That's
things
a good
like
tip.
that. Plus, it's like it's a little more intimate to look at each other's lips. It starts to look a little sweeter, and a lot of times then they'll start smiling. You get like the natural reaction. Poses like that, I think, have helped me tremendously with couples who want to look like they know exactly what they're doing but don't necessarily.
Actually, you've made me think of something, because me and my husband were the models for another photographer. Totally different style, very, very hands off, very candid, darker photography, but like incredibly good. So we were the models for him, and he got us to stand looking into each other's eyes for 2 minutes, and he said, "You're not allowed to move. You're not allowed to speak. You just look into each other's eyes." And we stood there going, "Oh, I feel really awkward. I feel really awkward. Do you feel posed? I feel posed." Like thinking, like, why is he doing this? Like, it's supposed to be non-posed pictures, and yet we're posed for 2 minutes and we're not allowed to move, just look into each other's eyes. But you know what? The rest of the shoot, we were so connected with each other, because he went off and for the workshop, he was talking to the attendees, but in reality, he says, I'll just go off and look for locations, look for angles that I can use later on. But then he started getting us moving and laughing and playing games with each other, and we were so much more connected with each other, because we'd had that 2 minutes where there was nothing else in the world, just the two of us. And then when it actually came, he got us to do some emotional, like, things like, I think it was like hug, like it's the last time you're gonna see each other, and I like started crying, like, and he got like you would think he was doing like this distortion. He was doing free lensing, so he got his lens off and he made it all like he focused in on the tear on my cheek, stuff like that. I don't think we would have been that comfortable with each other and with him had he not started it like that. And I've never actually had the courage to start a wedding photo shoot like that, because it's only 2 minutes, but I think I always feel like, there's not a lot of time. I can't afford 2 minutes to just not take any pictures. But you've reminded me of it. I think maybe I might try that in the coming weddings, because it did really help us. It's interesting to have been models and to know what that's like, and I felt really nervous as well, and I thought, okay, this is how my clients feel. It is really nerve-wracking to be in front of a camera.
It's so funny. I love watching other photographers work.
I
love seeing how they direct and pose and interact with their subjects. I second shot a wedding for Eric McVeigh a few months ago, and he is one of my favorite photographers, and I was so excited to just watch him work that I felt it was so interesting to see how other people handle things like posing or moments of awkwardness, or creating like comfortable ease between their subjects. I feel like it's always good to watch other people. I think it's plus, like, there are so many different ways that people can create like that comfortable situation. I've heard of so many people that like barely pose versus pose down to like the way they have their hands, and I just think it's so interesting to see how everyone handles it differently.
It really is, isn't it? I like you said, I think you can't watch enough photographers working, because there'll
Yeah.
just be a little bit that you pick up from each person, and like 95% of what they do, you try and do it, it does not work because it only works because it's them. But then
Right.
there's just the little gems that you try and you're like, oh, that actually really worked. I got a good, reaction or a good result from the picture. So yeah, I find it fascinating to watch other photographers working too.
Yeah, and I think that's also for new photographers who are trying to get into the editorial world or who are getting better with posing. A lot of times I'll say it's great to work with real models, because you really can sort of experiment with posing and do things that you're maybe uncomfortable directing clients into, where clients will feel subconscious or be unsure about your pose.
Yeah.
Models won't. You can tell them
Yeah.
to do anything and they'll run with it, or they'll turn it into their own pose. And I just feel like it gives you sort of a little courage to kind of play around with less expected poses or setups or compositions, where
Yes.
when it's someone approaching it like a job versus you being the like knowledgeable source, I think
Yeah.
it becomes more of a level playing field instead of you having to be the person that they're like looking to for all the
Mm.
direction.
That makes a lot of sense. Oh, that is so fascinating. We haven't actually, I don't think, talked so far on the podcast about this kind of thing, about editorial work, because a lot of your work is editorial. You have a lot of commercial
Hmm.
clients. Are your commercial clients from from those editorial shoots, or do you actually have totally separate commercial clients? You just photograph their product or service,
Yeah.
whatever they do. Yeah, how does that work?
Yeah, I think a lot of them saw the work I did for Bridal Fashion Week, or I would meet them at Fashion Week, because you can go in, and a lot of times I would be hired to shoot backstage, which is
Mm,
sometimes my favorite part of it, because you
yeah.
really can work to kind of shoot the behind the scenes, and I think it's a little more interesting than runway. But
Yeah.
I met some of the designers there, and did some different work for designers. I did a shoot for Carol Hanna, and then I was able to use those images to promote to
Mm,
other designers. And I just shot Joanna August's last collection a few
mm.
months ago, and that was really fun. That was very hands-on and interesting, as it wasn't even a full team. It was maybe like 2 or 3 people, but there was a
Yeah.
lot of, it was 2 models kind of playing around with different posing and different gowns, and we were shooting for their website and for Anthropologie's website. So that was
Mm.
interesting too, because then that was an extension of, I've actually never shot commercial work for a non-bridal brand. It
Yeah.
tends to be very wedding based, so
Yes.
a lot of wedding dress designers, and I shoot a lot of ring designers,
Ah.
which is really funny. I started shooting for Victor Barbone here in New York, and
Mhm.
she does beautiful antique rings.
Wow.
And I've been shooting for her for about 3 years now, I think.
Wow.
And other ring designers have seen those and hired me
Mhm.
to shoot their rings. I think it's a lot of sort of like seeing other people's images that I've done for them that
Yeah.
turns into, although we have then turned around and used a lot of those in editorials. So
Yes.
it's sort of both.
Yeah, I suppose it does overlap, a bit. And once word gets out, that you are good and trustworthy, and then more and more people will be interested in having you photograph their products as well. That's amazing. So for people who are interested in getting into that world of actually doing more commercial work as opposed to
Mhm.
just purely weddings, do you have any advice or tips on how to start networking, how to start making those contacts, and how to get the ball rolling with that kind of work?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, um, of course now Fashion Week, Bridal Fashion Week was supposed to happen this month, and it was
Mhm.
canceled,
Oh,
unfortunately.
yeah.
So it's the next one will be in October. And I would recommend anyone who's interested in getting into that would attend New York Bridal Fashion Week in
Mm.
October. There are a few different, they're sort of like mini conventions where you can attend and meet a lot of designers, smaller independent designers, or ones who are maybe not doing full runway shows but are showing their newest collections.
Yeah.
Um, And that is a great way to go and meet all of those different people. A lot of their PR teams are there. A lot of times, if you can connect with any sort of publication or magazine, they're more than thrilled to have you go shoot a show for them.
Okay.
I've worked with a lot of different publications to shoot new collections,
Mhm.
and because they want sort of like an exclusive look at the newest collection. People are really interested in seeing that during Fashion Week. Um, that's probably the best way to start getting
Yeah.
into it. You definitely need to have some sort of portfolio to start showing off to people.
Yes.
And I think having access to the newest content is always going to be a better idea than reaching out to designers for older pieces.
Yes.
Um, just because once you have those images, you can then send them to the designers. I would encourage sharing those with the PR teams and the designers so that they can
Mhm.
show them off and they can share them. That's the best way to create a connection between the two of you.
Yeah.
Um, and then once you have that link between you, I think it's sort of a great way to be able to reach out um, at a future time to say like, oh, I'd be really interested in shooting your collection, or
Mm.
using them for styled shoots is a great way to also create that.
Yeah.
Um, Developing a shoot where maybe the focus is on the fashion instead of I know a lot of people will create styled shoots and their focus will be on the ceremony space or the
Mhm.
tabletop. Instead, creating one where maybe the bride has three different dresses and changes
Mm.
three dresses, and the focus is more on the fashion instead of the ceremony or reception spaces. That
Yeah.
is a good way to develop that.
Amazing.
Um, it's definitely important to kind of start building a brand that way, or a portfolio that way, just so that you
Yeah.
have the content. Hmm.
That is incredibly practical and so helpful. I just feel like you're a wealth of information and help for this. And I understand that you offer workshops and mentoring as well. Can you tell us a little bit more
Hmm.
about where people can go to learn from you? You've obviously got a huge amount that you can offer somebody who's starting out with their photography or wanting to progress their photography. What is currently on offer for people to access your brain and and learn from you?
So I was supposed to have two one-day workshops in May. They've been postponed to either August or September. So we'll see when things start to pick back up. I love doing workshops. I love teaching so much. It is so fun. And last year we had a workshop in October right around Bridal Fashion Week. So we were able to bring all the attendees to go to a private um, show with a designer who then brought out all her gowns, and we were able to photograph those. So that was really fun. I think a lot of people were super excited to have their first chance to shoot Bridal Fashion Week, and that was really awesome of the designer to allow us to bring in 15 people. But
Wow.
things like that I think are so cool. So hopefully we'll be able to do something similar to that again. I also do one-on-one mentoring for a lot of people, which is obviously a little more focused on their goals. I have a lot of clients, a lot of photographers who come to me and say, I really want to get into fashion and bridal fashion.
Mhm.
Can our one-on-one mentoring just be focused on that? And totally, I'm always happy to do
Amazing.
something like that, or create an editorial for you that's based on providing you with that content so that you're able to then move forward and do that.
Yeah.
I have a whole page on my website that kind of goes over workshops and mentoring and things like that. And then I have an email list that people can sign up for. Hopefully, when everything
Amazing.
gets back to normal, and I'm able to reopen spots for that workshop.
Yeah. That's amazing. There's so many ways to get involved and to learn from you. That's brilliant. So I believe the website is Sophie Kaye, K with an E, sophiekphotography.com/workshops. If you
Hmm.
want to get in touch with Sophie and find out more about the one-to-one mentoring and these incredible workshops that she does. I believe you've also done them in Paris before. As
Yeah,
well. Yeah. So there's just so many opportunities to get involved. And I just think, yeah, you're a brilliant person to go to if you're interested in fashion or
thank you.
editorial work or commercial work. This is a brilliant person to talk to. So, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such an
Oh,
interesting conversation. You've got such a fascinating career and such incredible work. So, thank you so much for joining us.
thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Oh, it's been wonderful.
If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find more interviews, tips and inspiration in the Love Light Fine Art community on Facebook. You can also follow along with each new episode on the Love Light YouTube, podcast and Instagram. And don't forget to visit www.sarahjaneethan.co.uk/lovelight for information on training, real-life wedding workshops and online courses to develop your own fine art photography and connect with more of the clients you love.